10. The kerosene lamp throws a circle of copper light across the quilt. My mother stitched that quilt. Every square is a prayer she never said out loud. I sit on the edge of the bed in my dark wedding dress, hands folded the way I was taught, left over right, fingers still. The room smells of wood polish and cold November air pressing through the window. Seems downstairs, the last buggy has pulled away. The house has gone quiet, the way a church goes quiet after the final hymn. I have been married for 6 hours, and the man I married has never spoken a single word to me, not one. I am 19 years old, and I am listening for footsteps. My name is Sarah, and this is Amish Aunt. This channel is where I share the stories I carried in silence for too long, the ones that lived inside the walls of our plain houses and never made past the porch. If these words reach something in you, I'd be grateful if you subscribed and stayed. Tell me in the comments, have you ever waited for someone to speak, and the silence was louder than anything they could have said? The floorboards at the bottom of the staircase always creaked. I knew that sound from childhood. It was the sound of my father coming up after evening chores, the sound of my brothers sneaking down for leftover pie. But this creak was different, slower, heavier, deliberate, each step measured as though the person climbing was counting them too. I sat perfectly still. My hands had not moved from my lap. My breathing had gone shallow, the kind of shallow where your body decides for you that being small is safer than being seen. The footsteps stopped outside the door. There was a pause so long I could hear the wick of the lamp hissing inside its glass chimney. Then the handle turned. He stood in the doorway. I did not look up immediately. I looked at his boots first, mud still on the left one, a scrape of straw across the right. He was tall. I knew that already from watching him across rooms, across porches, across the careful distance our community kept between a young man and the woman chosen for him. But standing 3 feet from me, he seemed taller than memory had made him. He did not step forward. He stayed near the doorframe the way a man stands at the edge of water he is not sure is deep enough to hold him. 2 strangers in a room, married by law, married by God, separated by everything that words are supposed to bridge. I should explain what I mean when I say he had never spoken to me. It was not a rule written in the ordnung, not a commandment carved into the order of our church. No elder had told him he could not speak to me. It was something quieter than a rule. It was a structure. In our old order community in Lancaster County, courtship did not require conversation between the man and the woman. It required approval, the bishop's nod, the family's agreement, the quiet machinery of a community that had been matching its young for 200 years. What mattered was not whether we knew each other. What mattered was whether we fit. His family's land beside my family's faith, his willingness beside my obedience. I first saw him at a Sunday singing the autumn before. My mother sat beside me on the bench, and when he walked in, broad-shouldered hair still damp from washing, hymnal tucked under his arm, she gave me a nod. Just a nod. A small dip of the chin that carried the weight of a contract. I understood it the way every girl in our community understood it. That nod meant he had been discussed. It meant the families had spoken. It meant the path had been laid before my feet touched it. Gelassenheit, the yielding of self, was not something we practiced only in prayer. We practiced it in love, or in what was offered to us in place of love. During the courtship months, we were never alone. He came to our home twice, maybe 3 times, always with others present. He sat across the parlor while my father talked about the harvest. He ate at our table while my mother served pot roast and filled every silence with questions about his father's dairy herd. I watched his hands. That was all I had. The way he held his fork, firm but unhurried. The way he turned the pages of the Ausbund during him singing, careful, as though the paper might bruise. The way he broke bread, pulling, never cutting. The way our men always did. I built an entire man from gestures. I learned his silences before I ever learned his voice, and I told myself this was enough because I had never been told it shouldn't be. The wedding day lasted forever and no time at all, 3 hours on a hard wooden bench. The German hymns I had sung since I was 5 years old, now sounding different because they were being sung over my future. The bishop asked his questions. We answered with yes. Just yes. There was no kiss at the altar because there was no altar and there were no kisses in our tradition. The noon meal came: turkey roast, brown butter potatoes, the creamed celery my aunts had spent the morning preparing. The evening singing followed, voices rising in the candlelight, while the younger cousins chased each other behind the barn. Relatives smiled at me all day, not the kind of smile that says congratulations, the kind that says you have completed something. I felt less like a bride and more like a letter that had finally been sealed and delivered. Now the letter was in the room with its recipient. He closed the door behind him, softly. Not a slam, not a push, a careful press of wood against frame. He moved to the window, not to me. I could see his profile against the dark glass, the line of his jaw, the way his collar sat crooked from where someone had hugged him during the afternoon gathering. He stood there for what might have been 10 seconds or 10 years, and then he spoke. His first sentence to me, the first words this man had ever directed at my ears, "My heart, my life," came out low, almost rough, as though the words had been sitting in his throat for months and had grown edges. He said, "I asked God to make me worthy of your quiet." I did not move. I did not breathe. His voice was lower than I had imagined, the Pennsylvania Dutch syllables slightly uncertain, the kind of uncertain that comes from rehearsal, not ignorance. He had practiced this, maybe in the barn, maybe walking the fence line, maybe lying awake the night before staring at a ceiling, trying to find the right words for a woman he had never been allowed to know. I sat with his sentence the way you sit with a stone someone places in your open palm. You feel its weight before you understand its shape. I did not answer him that night. I could not because I was forbidden, but because no one had ever taught me what to say when someone saw my silence and called it something worth honoring. We lay in the dark later, side by side, not touching. I listened to him breathe, slow, steady, the breathing of a man who had done the one thing he came to do and was now resting from the effort of it. I did not cry. I was too busy listening to the sound of a marriage beginning in the only language either of us had been given. But silence, I would learn, is not always the same thing. Some silences hold you, others bury you. The morning after a wedding in our community is not a morning for tenderness. It is a morning for work. We were up before dawn, my husband and I, moving through my parents' house like two people who had memorized the same choreography but never rehearsed it together. He went to the barn. I went to the kitchen. My mother was already there, scrubbing the long tables from the day before, and she looked at me the way she always looked at me. With love, yes, but also with inspection. She was checking to see if I had settled, if the girl she raised had become the wife she promised. I picked up a rag and started wiping down the benches. She never asked me how the night had been. In our world, you did not ask. You watched, and if the woman kept working, the answer was good enough. Those first weeks lived inside a rhythm I had not expected. We stayed at my parents' home, as was custom, and the days filled themselves with visits. Every few evenings, we would hitch the buggy and ride to a relative's house, his side one night, mine the next, and they would feed us supper and give us a gift. A set of dishes, a hand-carved bread box, a quilt folded into a cedar chest. Each visit was warm, full of laughter and casseroles and uncles slapping my husband on the back. And each visit was also a performance. We sat beside each other. We ate from the same table. We smiled when spoken to. But between us, the language was still fragments. Pass the salt. The horse favors his left. Your mother wants us Sunday after church. I was learning him the way you learn a house you have moved into, by which doors stick, which floorboards moan, which windows let in the draft. He hummed when he was content. That was the first thing I learned that no one could have told me. Low, tuneless humming, bits of hymns from the Ausbund, sometimes just a note held and released like a breath he did not know he was holding. He hummed while fixing harnesses. He hummed while stacking firewood, and he went silent when something troubled him. Not angry silent, not punishing silent, just absent, as though a door inside him had closed, and he was standing on the other side of it, waiting for something to pass. I began reading his silences the way English people read words, scanning for meaning, for tone, for the space between what was said and what was meant. It was exhausting. And it was the only map I had. 3 months into the marriage, I heard him laugh for the first time. He was in the barn, mending a harness, and the leather snapped and whipped across his knuckles. I heard the crack from the kitchen where I was rolling dough, then a sound I had never heard, open, unguarded, the kind of laugh that comes before a man remembers anyone might be listening. I stopped, my hands went still in the flour. I walked to the doorway and stood there, watching him shake his hand and grin at his own clumsiness. He looked up, he saw me, and for the first time in our marriage, he smiled directly at me. Not beside me, not past me, but at me, the way a person smiles when they have been caught being human, and they are not ashamed of it, I thought. Maybe this is how love begins here. Not with a declaration, not with a sentence rehearsed in a barn, but with an accident, a snapped strap, a sound that escaped before permission was granted. My Aunt Sarah married under the same system. 20 years before me, same community, same ordnung, same silence woven into the courtship like thread through a loom. I did not hear her story until years into my own marriage. We were on her back porch, shelling peas into a tin bowl, the late afternoon light making everything gold and slow. I do not remember how the conversation turned, but she told me, in that flat voice she used for things that had stopped hurting only because she had stopped letting them, that her husband's first sentence to her on their wedding night was not a question and not a prayer. It was an instruction. He had looked at the kerosene lamp on her side of the bed and said, "The lamp goes on my side." 5 words. She moved the lamp. She did not move it back for 40 years. Aunt Sarah's husband was not a cruel man. I need you to understand that. He raised 6 children. He built a barn with his own hands in a single summer. He drove her to the hospital when her appendix nearly burst, and he sat in the waiting room all night reading scripture until the doctor said she would be fine. He was not a villain. He was a man who had been taught that authority and closeness were the same thing, that leading a home meant deciding where the lamp sat, which field got planted first. When the children were old enough for chores, he provided, he protected, he never raised his hand. But he also never asked her a question in 40 years that was not practical. Never once said, "What are you thinking?" Never once said, "Are you happy?" Both things were true about their marriage. It was stable, faithful, rooted in community and God. And it was a house where a woman's inner life had no furniture, no room, no lamp on her side of the bed. If you are still listening, then maybe you already know this feeling. The one where love and loneliness sleep under the same quilt, where gratitude and grief share the same breath. If this story has meant something to you, I would be grateful if you stayed with this channel. There are more stories I need to tell, and some of them I think you need to hear. After Aunt Sarah's story, I began to look at my own marriage the way you look at a painting you have walked past every day and suddenly see for the first time. His first sentence, "I asked God to make me worthy of your quiet," had lived inside me like something sacred, but now I turned it over. He valued my quiet. He asked God to be worthy of it, but did he ever ask me to be loud? Did he ever sit across the table and say, "Tell me what you are thinking. Tell me what you want. Tell me who you are," when no one is watching? He made decisions the way all our men made decisions, with confidence, with prayer, with the assumption that leadership and love were the same hand, reaching for the same door. He was kind, but kind the way a shepherd is kind. He led. I followed, and I loved him. I want to be clear about that. I loved him in the way our community taught me to love, with patience, with labor, with a quiet that he had honored from the very first night. But there was something else living beside that love, something I could not name for years, something that sat in my chest like a word caught sideways in my throat. I named it on an evening 7 years into our marriage. The children were asleep. He was asleep. The house held that particular silence that comes only after everyone has stopped needing you for the day. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I was not drinking, and I realized the unnamed feeling was grief. Not grief for something that had died, grief for something that had never been born. My own unspoken words, not the words he never said to me. He had said enough in his way to build a life on, but the words I never said to anyone. Gelassenheit had taught me to yield, to surrender my will to God, to husband, to community. And somewhere inside that surrendering, I had lost the ability to know what I even wanted to say. His first sentence honored my quiet. But my quiet had never been a choice. It was the only language I was given. And I had mistaken its shape for my own. I did not leave. That is not this story. I stayed in the same house, the same marriage, the same community, where the women shell peas and the men build barns, and the silence runs through everything like groundwater. But I began to do something small, something no one saw. I bought a notebook, plain, brown, the kind the children used for arithmetic, and I hid it in the bottom of my sewing basket, beneath the pins and the spools of dark thread. And I started writing, not letters, not prayers, just words that were mine, what I noticed, what I felt, the shape of my husband's hands when he slept, the color of the sky the morning after my first child was born, the sound of Aunt Sarah's flat voice on that golden porch. I wrote the way a woman who has been holding her breath finally breathes, not dramatically, not loudly, just continuously. One sentence after another, each one a small act of claiming something the system never offered me and I never thought to ask for. His first sentence to me was beautiful. I want you to know that. It was beautiful and it was real, and I have carried it inside me for longer than most people carry anything. But the sentence that changed my life was not his. It was the first one I wrote that was mine.